At a crowded backyard barbecue, my 16-year-old stepdaughter pointed her finger right in my face and barked, "Do your job, maid." I finally snapped and told her to watch her mouth. Before I could say another word, my husband rushed over, slapped me hard across the cheek, and yelled that I was nothing but a poor freeloader. He told me to get out of his house immediately. I did not cry. I did not scream. I quietly packed a single bag and walked away without looking back. The very next morning, my phone rang. It was my husband in a blind panic. And for the first time in my entire life, I heard that arrogant man sobbing uncontrollably. I am Nora, 33 years old, and if you have ever been gaslit, belittled, or treated like a second-class citizen by a partner who thinks they hold all the financial power, pull up a chair. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe to see how I dismantled my husband's entire existence in exactly 24 hours. It is a masterclass in silent warfare. To understand the absolute perfection of his downfall, you have to understand the nightmare I allowed him to build. My husband David was 38 years old. He was the chief executive officer of a mid-sized tech company in Chicago, a man whose ego entered a room a full 5 minutes before he actually did. He genuinely believed his bank account dictated his worth, and by extension, dictated mine. When we met 3 years ago, I introduced myself as a freelance copywriter. I wore basic cardigans, drove a reliable older sedan, and lived a very quiet life. David absolutely loved that about me. He loved feeling like my savior. He thrived on the power dynamic of being the high-flying executive, taking care of his struggling artist wife. He also came with a daughter named Madison. She was 16 years old, fiercely entitled, and armed with a premium credit card her father never bothered to monitor. From the exact day I moved into David's sprawling suburban estate, Madison made it her personal mission to remind me of my place. She would leave dirty shoes on my favorite rugs, command me to prepare specific meals, and complain loudly if the house was not spotless. And David never once corrected her behavior. The utter disrespect was not a sudden explosion. It was a slow, dripping poison that infected every corner of our daily lives. I remember a specific Tuesday morning exactly 1 year before the barbecue that ended our marriage. I was standing in our massive chef's kitchen, breathing in the scent of roasted coffee beans, brewing my morning pot, before heading to my small desk in the corner of the living room. Madison stomped down the sweeping oak staircase. She did not say good morning. She did not even look at my face. She marched right up to the kitchen island, balled up a delicate silk blouse that reeked of stale perfume, and threw it directly at my chest. "Wash this," Madison ordered, pulling her phone from her pocket and immediately scrolling through her social media feeds. "Cold water only. And do not ruin the fabric like you did my cashmere sweater last week. You clearly do not know how to handle expensive things." I caught the shirt as it hit me, the cold fabric slipping through my fingers. I looked over at the breakfast nook. David was sitting there in his tailored designer suit, sipping a fresh espresso and reading financial news on his tablet. He heard every single word his daughter just said to me. "Madison," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and calm. "The laundry basket is in your bathroom upstairs. I am not your maid." Madison scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes with such force I thought they might get stuck. "Dad, tell her to do it. I have cheer practice later and I need that shirt for a party tonight." I waited for David to intervene to teach his daughter a basic lesson in respect and boundaries. Instead, David finally looked up from his screen. He did not look angry at his daughter's blatant disrespect toward his wife. He looked annoyed that I had interrupted his morning reading routine. He let out a long, heavy sigh, adjusting his expensive luxury watch. "Nora, just do it, please," David said, dismissing me with a careless wave of his hand. "You are home all day anyway. It is not like you have a demanding corporate schedule to keep up with. It takes 2 minutes to run a wash cycle." "David?" "She threw it at me," I replied, feeling the heat rising in my cheeks. "This is about basic respect in my own home. It is about contributing to the household." "Nora," he shot back. his voice dropping into that patronizing, authoritative tone he reserved exclusively for speaking to his junior employees. I pay the mortgage, I pay the utilities, I pay for the groceries you are eating right now. The least you can do is help my daughter with a simple chore so she can focus on her extracurricular activities. Do not make a big deal out of nothing. He looked back down at his tablet, signaling that the conversation was entirely over. Madison flashed me a triumphant, venomous smirk, grabbed an apple from the crystal fruit bowl, and walked out the front door without another word. I stood there in the quiet kitchen, gripping the silk blouse until my knuckles turned white. Any other woman might have cried. Any other woman might have screamed, thrown the shirt in the trash, or packed her bags right then and there to escape the humiliation. But I did not shed a single tear. I did not argue or raise my voice. I just smiled. A cold, hollow smile that neither of them bothered to notice. "Of course, David," I said softly. "I will take care of it right now." I walked out of the kitchen and down the long hallway toward the laundry room, carrying the shirt and carrying a massive secret that was about to turn his entire financial empire to dust. I closed the heavy wooden door of the laundry room and slid the lock into place. The sharp click of the metal mechanism served as a psychological switch, instantly transforming me from Nora, the submissive dependent wife, into Nora, the executioner. I dropped Madison's delicate silk blouse onto the cold tile floor and stepped right over it without a second glance. Reaching up to the highest shelf above the washing machine, I moved a bulk box of dryer sheets and pulled down a small heavy metal lockbox. I quickly keyed in the 6-digit security code. The lid popped open, revealing not spare cash or jewelry, but a sleek, highly encrypted smartphone. I powered on the device and waited for the secure network connection to establish. I needed to hide this phone because I needed to hide my entire reality from the man I married. By the time I turned 29, I had already made my first $100 million through a series of aggressive software patents and strategic corporate acquisitions. I built an empire from the ground up, but I learned a very painful lesson along the way. Extreme wealth fundamentally changes how people look at you. Men in the corporate world never saw me as a genuine partner. They looked at me as a walking automated teller machine, a blank check, or a convenient shortcut to elite social circles and limitless funding. I deliberately created the modest copywriter persona because I wanted to be loved for my mind and my heart, not for my financial portfolio. When I met David, he seemed like the perfect protector. He was ambitious, confident, and fiercely protective of me. But the moment he put a wedding ring on my finger and moved me into this sprawling estate, his mask completely slipped off. He did not want an equal partner in life. He wanted a captive audience. He wanted someone positioned beneath him so he could feel incredibly tall. He demanded a dependent wife to validate his fragile ego, and Patricia, his deeply toxic mother, was the architect of his endless arrogance. The phone screen lit up brightly, displaying 20 unread messages on my secure server. I immediately opened the thread with Harrison. Harrison was a 50-year-old Wall Street veteran, a brilliant and ruthless financial strategist who served as my trusted proxy. He was the public face of my private equity firm, sitting in boardrooms and giving interviews while I pulled every single string from the shadows. His most recent message glowed on the screen. "Good morning, boss. The quarterly reports for the European acquisitions are finalized and looking strong. Also, David's tech company is bleeding capital much faster than we initially projected. He just filed for a massive bridge loan to cover his payroll and operational costs. Do you want me to authorize Apex Holdings to initiate the hostile takeover right now? We can completely crush him by Friday." I stared at the glowing text, listening to the muffled sounds of David leaving for work upstairs. I heard the heavy thud of his designer shoes walking across the hardwood floor and the sharp beep of his luxury sport utility vehicle unlocking in the driveway. He truly believed he was the absolute king of the castle. He genuinely believed I was a financial liability who would wither and die without his bank account to sustain me. He had absolutely no idea that Apex Holdings, the massive private equity firm he was currently begging for a financial lifeline, was entirely owned and operated by the woman standing in his laundry room. I typed my response to Harrison with rapid, precise keystrokes. "Hold the takeover, Harrison. deny his bridge loan through our subsidiary channels, but do it in a way that makes him think he still has a strong chance at a full acquisition later. Let the financial pressure build up on his shoulders. I want him absolutely desperate. I want him to dig this hole so deep he cannot even see the sunlight anymore. Harrison replied almost instantly. Understood, boss. He is going to drown. By the way, the transfer for the property deed cleared completely this morning. The Delaware Shell Corporation is fully registered and legally impenetrable. He is officially nothing more than a tenant in his own house. Perfect, I typed back. The housing arrangement was my greatest silent victory. David thought he was paying a massive mortgage on this luxury estate, constantly reminding me that he put the roof over my head. In reality, I bought this entire property in cash through a blind trust before we ever moved in. The hefty monthly payments David made with such arrogant pride went directly into an offshore account that I completely controlled. He thought he was providing for a helpless wife. I was actually providing him with a very expensive, highly monitored rental property. I powered down the encrypted phone, locked it securely back inside the metal box, and slid it out of sight behind the dryer sheets. Looking down at the floor, I picked up Madison's silk blouse. The stale perfume clung to the fabric. I opened the washing machine, tossed the delicate garment inside, and grabbed a large industrial bottle of harsh bleach from the bottom shelf. I poured a very generous cup of the toxic chemical directly onto the fragile silk. I closed the lid, set the machine to the heaviest, hottest water cycle available, and firmly pressed the start button. I stood there for a moment, listening to the hot water rush into the drum, a quiet, steady rhythm, serving as the soundtrack to the financial war I had just officially declared on my husband. I unlocked the heavy wooden door and stepped back out into the main hallway. The house was completely empty now. David had left for his corporate office to play the role of the big-shot executive, entirely unaware that the executioner was already living inside his walls. I walked back to my small, unassuming desk in the corner of the living room, opened my cheap laptop, and calmly resumed playing the role of the grateful, struggling wife. 3 days after the laundry room incident, we were seated at an upscale steakhouse in downtown Chicago. It was a Friday night, a lavish dinner to celebrate Madison turning 16 and officially receiving her learner's permit. The private dining room hummed with the sound of clinking crystal and soft jazz music playing from hidden speakers. The ambient lighting cast a warm glow over the expensive cuts of meat and full-bodied red wines covering the long table. Patricia, my mother-in-law, sat at the head of the heavy oak table. She was draped in heavy pearls, smelling strongly of expensive gin and profound entitlement. David sat directly to her right, practically glowing under her constant stream of praise. I sat quietly at the opposite end, nursing a simple glass of sparkling water, wearing a plain black dress that I bought years ago. "Well, Madison," Patricia cooed, reaching into her oversized designer handbag. She pulled out a gleaming metallic credit card and slid it across the crisp white tablecloth. "Happy 16th birthday, darling. Your father and I set up a platinum card for you. It has no preset spending limit. It is time you start learning how to shop like a woman of our standing." Madison snatched the card off the table, her eyes lighting up with unfiltered greed. "Oh my gosh, Grandma, thank you so much. Dad, look at this." David beamed, raising his heavy crystal whiskey glass. "Do not spend it all in one place, kiddo. But remember, you are a reflection of this family now. Only the best for you." I kept my face perfectly neutral, slowly cutting into my steak. Giving a 16-year-old girl an unlimited platinum credit card was financial suicide, especially considering David's company was currently begging my firm for a bridge loan just to make payroll next week. He was funding this entire extravagant dinner on borrowed time, but it was not my place to speak. I was just the prop wife meant to sit silently and admire his false empire. Unfortunately, my silence was never enough for Patricia. She needed me to bleed. "You should really take Nora shopping with you, Madison," Patricia said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. The entire table went completely silent. Patricia looked at me, her eyes sweeping over my simple, unbranded clothing with obvious disdain. "I mean, look at her. She dresses like a substitute teacher on a Tuesday. It is honestly embarrassing for David to bring her to corporate events looking so aggressively middle class." David chuckled. It was an actual audible chuckle. "Mom, be nice to her. Nora is a creative type. They do not care about high fashion or looking presentable. Being a creative is fine for a weekend hobby, Patricia snapped, taking a long sip of her martini. But let us call it exactly what it is. It is a little typing hobby. She sits on her cheap laptop in your beautiful house, earning absolute pennies while you break your back in the real world, paying for the massive roof over her head. Honestly, Nora, you should be on your knees thanking David every single day of your life. If it were not for him, you would probably be living in a dirty studio apartment, eating canned soup for dinner. I placed my knife and fork down on the porcelain plate. The metal clicked sharply against the ceramic, echoing in the sudden quiet of the private dining room. I slowly looked up, meeting Patricia's icy, condescending glare. I appreciate your deep concern about my wardrobe, Patricia, I said, making sure my voice remained calm, almost soothing. But my little typing hobby fulfills me, and I assure you I am very aware of exactly who pays for what in this family. Are you? Patricia scoffed, leaning forward across the table like a predator sizing up an easy meal. Because when Madison asked you to wash her shirt this week, I heard you gave her attitude. Let us get one thing totally straight, Nora. You do not bring any actual capital into this marriage. You bring yourself. So the absolute least you can do is maintain the home and serve the people who actually matter. My husband sat there swirling the amber liquid in his glass, watching his mother verbally eviscerate me. He did not say a single word to defend his wife. He liked it. He liked watching me shrink, or at least watching me perform the act of shrinking. It validated his superiority complex in ways his failing business never could. I looked at Madison. She was busy taking a photo of her new platinum card to post online, completely ignoring the tension, completely insulated by the toxic bubble her father and grandmother had built around her. She was a spoiled child being raised to be a cruel adult. This was the dynamic they expected me to accept forever. They expected me to swallow my pride, lower my head, and apologize for existing in their presence. They thought my lack of designer labels meant a lack of intelligence. They thought my quiet demeanor meant I was weak and defenseless against their financial leverage. They truly believed they held all the power in the room. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water. In my mind, I was already calculating the exact timeline of David's financial ruin. I knew that by the time Madison tried to use that shiny new platinum card next month, the accounts tied to it would be frozen by the bank due to insufficient funds. I knew that the designer handbag Patricia was clutching would soon be auctioned off to pay for her son's legal defense fees. And I knew that the beautiful house they kept throwing in my face was legally mine, and they were merely guests overstaying their welcome. But they needed to feel invincible tonight. They needed to climb to the very top of their pedestal, so the fall would absolutely shatter them. Before I could even formulate a diplomatic response to Patricia's venomous speech, a heavy silver fork slammed down onto the table. The sudden violent clatter of metal against porcelain echoed through the private dining room like a gunshot. It cut through the soft jazz music and silenced the ambient hum of the restaurant entirely. It was not David. That is enough, Patricia. The voice was deep, booming, and completely devoid of fear. I looked across the wide expanse of the table at Jamal. He was my husband's brother-in-law, married to David's younger sister, Rachel. Jamal was a highly successful African-American corporate attorney. At 34 years old, he was brilliant, intensely sharp, and entirely unimpressed by the fake wealth my husband constantly paraded around. Jamal was a self-made man who had clawed his way up through elite law schools using sheer intellect and grit. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that actually fit his athletic frame completely, contrasting with David's flashy but poorly tailored attempts at looking like a billionaire. Jamal was the only person in this entire family who saw straight through the smoke and mirrors. Jamal glared directly at Patricia, his jaw set hard. You do not talk to Nora like that. She is David's wife, not your personal employee. She is certainly not a servant you can order around to wash your granddaughter's dirty laundry. Patricia gasped, loudly pressing her hand against her chest, as if she had been physically struck. She looked at Jamal with pure, unadulterated shock. In her pristine, wealthy suburban bubble, nobody ever dared to speak to her with such raw authority. David's face instantly turned a dark, angry shade of purple. His fragile ego had just been punctured right in front of his mother and his teenage daughter. He dropped his whiskey glass onto the table, splashing amber liquid over the rim. "Watch your tone," Jamal David warned, pointing a rigid finger across the table. "You need to keep your nose out of my marriage and out of my personal finances. Nora is my wife, and my mother is just giving her some hard truths about how the real world operates." Hard truths. Jamal fired back instantly, his eyes narrowing as he leaned forward. His presence commanded the entire room. "David, you sit there letting your mother humiliate your wife because it feeds your own massive vanity. You want to talk about capital. You want to talk about bringing money into this marriage. I am tired of watching this family treat Nora like collateral damage just to make yourselves feel important." Rachel, sitting next to Jamal, looked incredibly uncomfortable. She placed a hand gently on his arm, trying to de-escalate the situation. "Jamal, maybe we should just enjoy the dinner. Let it go." But Jamal gently shrugged off her hand, keeping his intense gaze locked entirely on my furious husband. "No, Rachel, I am not letting it go today. Considering the current market downturn and the actual state of your tech company, David, you should be profoundly grateful you have a wife who lives modestly. You should be thanking her for not burning through cash like it is a limitless resource." David let out a loud, mocking laugh, but I could hear the desperate tremor hiding just beneath the surface. "You are just a lawyer billing hourly rates, Jamal. You do not know the first thing about running a tech empire. Do not act like you understand my balance sheets. My company is mere weeks away from a massive acquisition. When this deal closes, it will make your entire law firm look like a neighborhood lemonade stand." Jamal did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He simply delivered his next words with the surgical precision of a seasoned litigator destroying a hostile witness on the stand. "You are financing a luxury lifestyle on massive debt, David. I have seen the market trends in your specific sector. I have seen the public filings. Do not act like a king when you are heavily leveraged to the bank and drowning in operational costs. You are putting everything on the line to look rich instead of actually building wealth." The tension in the private dining room was absolutely suffocating. David looked ready to flip the heavy oak table. Patricia was breathing heavily, her face flushed with outrage. Madison had finally put her phone down, staring at her father with a flicker of confusion, perhaps wondering for the very first time if the limitless credit card in her hand was actually backed by real money. But amidst the chaotic silence, I caught Jamal's eye. He looked across the table directly at me. There was a silent, probing question in his sharp gaze. It was a quiet, firm offer of absolute protection. Jamal was a top-tier corporate lawyer. He had access to extensive public records and property deeds. I knew just by the specific, calculated way he was looking at me that he had seen something anomalous. He had likely pulled the property records for our sprawling estate. He must have noticed the Delaware Shell Corporation listed as the primary owner. The registered agent protocol might have obscured my name, but Jamal was smart enough to recognize a highly sophisticated financial fortress when he saw one. He knew David did not own the house. He knew something was fundamentally wrong with David's arrogant narrative. Jamal was ready to drop the ultimate bomb right then and there. He was fully prepared to expose David's fake empire to protect me from Patricia's vicious cruelty. I held his gaze steadily. I did not blink. I gave Jamal a microscopic, almost invisible shake of my head. "Not yet." Jamal is a man who reads rooms for a living. He caught my tiny movement instantly. The fierce, protective anger in his eyes slowly shifted into profound realization. He saw the cold calculation hiding behind my plain black dress. He finally understood that I was not a victim waiting to be rescued. I was a predator, patiently waiting for my prey to step directly into the center of the trap. Jamal took a slow, deep breath. He leaned back in his leather chair, crossed his strong arms over his chest, and offered me a very subtle nod of respect. He backed down deliberately, letting David think he had won the argument. "You know what David," Jamal said, his voice returning to a smooth, casual tone. "You are absolutely right. It is your company. You handle your business exactly how you see fit. Let us just enjoy the expensive steak." David puffed out his chest, completely oblivious to the silent exchange that had just occurred between us. He adjusted his collar, wearing a victorious smirk. Exactly, David sneered. Stick to writing contracts, Jamal. Leave the empire building to me. Patricia smiled, pleased that her golden child had reasserted his dominance. Madison went right back to texting her friends about her new platinum card. And I went back to sipping my sparkling water, feeling a deep, dark satisfaction blooming in my chest. The trap was perfectly set. It just needed a little more time to snap completely shut. The following Tuesday began with a quiet, decisive victory. I spent the early morning in a highly secure private conference room downtown, sitting across from Harrison. We were finalizing the strategic maneuvers that would eventually bleed David's tech company dry. I signed off on 3 different aggressive market plays, effectively boxing my husband into a financial corner he could never escape. When the meeting concluded, I swapped my tailored blazer for a faded, oversized cardigan, climbed back into my reliable older sedan, and drove toward the sprawling suburban estate I legally owned but pretended merely to inhabit. The drive gave me time to reflect on the steakhouse dinner. Patricia had handed Madison a loaded weapon in the form of a platinum credit card, and David had practically cheered her on. I knew it was only a matter of time before that toxic combination of entitlement and unlimited spending power erupted. I just did not expect it to happen quite so quickly. I pulled into the long circular driveway and parked near the garage. Even before I unlocked the heavy oak front door, I could hear the muffled, vibrating bass of loud pop music echoing from the second floor. David was at his corporate office playing the role of the untouchable executive, which meant Madison had the house to herself after school. I stepped into the grand foyer and set my keys on the console table. The music was deafening, completely shattering the usual afternoon quiet. I walked toward the sweeping staircase, running my hand along the polished banister as I climbed to the second floor. My home office was located at the end of the east hallway. It was a modest space I had claimed when I first moved in, functioning perfectly for my cover story as a struggling freelance copywriter. It had a simple wooden desk, a comfortable chair, and a large bay window that let in the afternoon sun. It was the only room in the entire mansion that I had organized specifically for myself. But as I reached the top of the stairs and turned down the corridor, I stopped dead in my tracks. My professional facade was literally scattered across the hardwood floor. My modest desk chair was overturned against the wall. My carefully organized file folders, my pens, my notebooks, and the cheap laptop I used to maintain my cover story had been dumped unceremoniously in the hallway like garbage waiting to be taken to the curb. A stack of my printed documents had been stepped on, bearing the faint, dusty imprint of a designer's sneaker. I stood perfectly still, looking at the physical manifestation of my family's total lack of respect for me. Through the open doorway of my office, the pop music blared from a portable speaker. I stepped closer and looked inside. The room was completely unrecognizable. My desk was gone, shoved out of the hallway to make room for 2 men in matching delivery uniforms. They were currently assembling a massive Hollywood-style vanity mirror surrounded by bright glaring bulbs. Across the room, another worker was drilling holes into the wall to install heavy brass clothing racks. Madison was standing in the center of the chaos, holding her phone up to record the entire process. She was wearing designer loungewear, sipping an iced coffee, and gesturing wildly at the delivery men. "Put the velvet ottoman over there by the window," Madison ordered, pointing her manicured finger toward the spot where my desk used to sit. "The natural lighting is best right there, and I need the perfect background for my brand partnership videos." "Madison," I said, keeping my voice firm but strictly controlled, "what exactly is going on here?" She turned around, not looking startled in the slightest. In fact, she looked incredibly pleased with herself. She took a slow sip of her iced coffee and let out a dramatic sigh, as if my presence was an unbearable inconvenience to her busy schedule. "Oh, good you are home," Madison said, waving her hand toward the hallway. "I told the movers to put your little typing stuff out there." Grandma Patricia was totally right at dinner the other night. You do not actually need a whole dedicated room just to write silly blog posts. I am launching my new influencer career, and I need a professional dressing room. This room has the best lighting, so I took it. I looked at the massive vanity mirror, the expensive brass racks, and the plush velvet ottoman currently being hauled into the space. I did the math instantly. She had easily just dropped $15,000 outfitting a room she had no right to claim. You charged all of this to the platinum card your grandmother gave you, I stated, phrasing it as a fact rather than a question. Obviously, Madison scoffed, crossing her arms. Dad said I deserve the best, and since you do not bring any real money into this house, you do not get to dictate how the floor plan is used. Dad said my personal brand has massive potential. Your little hobby does not actually pay the bills around here, Nora. So you can just figure out somewhere else to sit. She parroted her father and her grandmother with terrifying accuracy. She had been thoroughly programmed to view me as a financial parasite, a worthless addition to their royal lineage. I looked down at my cheap laptop sitting on the hallway floor. The irony was almost poetic. That plastic device contained the secure encryption keys to a $4 billion empire. The woman they treated like a peasant could buy and sell their entire bloodline 10 times over before dinner. Any normal woman would have lost her temper. Any normal wife would have demanded the delivery men stop working, ordered her stepdaughter to put the room back together, and screamed about boundaries and respect. But I just looked at Madison, observing the sheer magnitude of her arrogance. I knew that the platinum card she just maxed out was tied directly to David's severely overleveraged personal accounts. By purchasing these velvet ottomans and vanity mirrors, Madison was actively draining the very last drops of liquidity her father had left. She was quite literally accelerating his complete financial ruin, and she was doing it all with a smug smile on her face. I did not yell. I did not demand my room back. I slowly bent down and began gathering my scattered folders from the hardwood floor. Make sure the delivery men do not scuff the baseboards, Madison, I said calmly, stacking my notebooks together. I would hate for your new dressing room to look anything less than absolutely perfect. Madison rolled her eyes, turning her back to me to continue filming her social media content. She thought she had won a massive victory. She thought she had successfully asserted her dominance and put the poor stepmother in her rightful place. I picked up my laptop, cradling it under my arm. I listened to the sound of a heavy vehicle pulling into the driveway below. The low rumble of the engine signaled that David was finally home from his corporate office. The stage was set perfectly for him to walk upstairs and witness his daughter's ultimate act of disrespect, giving him the perfect opportunity to either defend his wife or cement his own downfall. I stood in the hallway holding my box of belongings, waiting for him to climb the stairs and make his choice. The heavy footsteps on the oak staircase grew louder. David crested the landing, his tailored suit jacket slung over one shoulder, his silk tie already loosened. He stopped, taking in the bizarre scene before him. He looked at my overturned chair, the scattered folders, the cardboard box clutched in my arms, and finally, the chaotic construction zone inside my former office. The loud pop music masked his initial sigh, but I saw his shoulders drop in profound annoyance. He did not look like a husband rushing to defend his wife's dignity. He looked like a man who had just been handed another tedious task at the end of a long workday. He stepped past my belongings, ignoring me entirely, and leaned into the doorway. Madison immediately paused her recording, adopting a sweet, innocent expression. "Look at this mess," David said, though his tone held zero actual anger. "What is going on up here?" Madison flipped her hair over her shoulder. "Grandma Patricia said I needed a professional space for my brand partnerships, Dad. This room has the best natural lighting. I am setting up my influencer studio." David let out a breath, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Right. The influencer studio. Just keep the noise down, okay? I have a massive headache from the board meeting." He turned around, ready to walk to our master bedroom, and closed the door on the situation. I shifted the cardboard box in my arms, stepping directly into his path. "David," I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady and devoid of the hysteria he expected, "your daughter just threw my professional workspace into the hallway while I was downstairs. I need you to address this blatant disrespect immediately." David looked at me, his eyes hardening into twin chips of ice. He did not appreciate being challenged, especially not by the woman he considered a financial dependent. He stepped closer, using his physical height to try and intimidate me, a classic corporate power play he used on junior executives. "Nora, please stop being so incredibly dramatic," David muttered, his voice dropping into a harsh, patronizing whisper. "Madison is building a personal brand. She actually needs the square footage and lighting for her video content. You just type on a laptop. You do not need an entire dedicated room to write a few freelance blog posts." I held his gaze, refusing to shrink. "I am your wife, David. This is supposed to be our home." She completely violated my personal space and literally dumped my belongings onto the floor like trash. "You are going to stand there and let her treat me like a squatter." "Let us be brutally honest for a second, Nora," David replied, a cruel smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "You are a freelancer. You write marketing copy for absolute pennies. Your work does not pay the bills around here. My company pays the massive mortgage on this estate. My company pays for the groceries. My company pays for the electricity you use to charge that cheap little laptop. Madison is my daughter, and this is her house just as much as it is mine. You can work literally anywhere. Just work at the kitchen island." He delivered the ultimate insult with absolute conviction. He genuinely believed that my time, my space, and my basic human dignity were completely worthless, simply because my perceived income was lower than his. He believed his financial dominance gave him the right to strip away my self-respect. "I have a massive acquisition deal happening in a few weeks." David continued, adjusting his expensive watch. "I am under immense pressure to keep this family in the lavish lifestyle they are accustomed to. I need you to be supportive. I need you to stop creating ridiculous problems over a spare bedroom. Just take your box downstairs and let it go." From the doorway, Madison giggled. She walked past us into the hallway, deliberately bumping her shoulder hard against mine as she headed toward her bedroom. "Thanks, Daddy," she sang out, making sure I heard every syllable of her victory. Any normal wife would have thrown the box at his feet. Any normal woman would have screamed, demanded her room back, or packed a bag and called a divorce lawyer. But I was not a normal woman. I was a predator wearing sheep's clothing, and my prey had just handed me the perfect justification to utterly destroy his life. I looked at David. I did not yell. I did not cry. I simply offered him a soft, beautifully compliant smile. "You are absolutely right, David," I said smoothly. "Your work is far more important than my typing hobby. I will move my things down to the kitchen island right now. Please go rest. You look very stressed." David's rigid posture instantly relaxed. He smirked, visibly satisfied that he had successfully put me in my place and reasserted his dominance. He reached out and patted my shoulder in a deeply condescending gesture of approval, then walked past me toward the master suite to change his clothes. I bent down, picked up my cheap laptop, and carried my cardboard box down the sweeping staircase. I walked into the massive empty chef's kitchen, set my things on the marble island, and pulled out one of the heavy leather bar stools. I sat down in the quiet kitchen. I did not open my cheap laptop. Instead, I reached into the hidden zippered compartment of my bag and pulled out my highly encrypted smartphone. The screen illuminated my face in the dim lighting. I quickly opened my secure messaging channel to Harrison. My fingers flew across the digital keyboard with lethal precision. "Harrison," I typed. "Initiate a hostile takeover of Meridian Software Solutions immediately. Buy up every available share through our proxy accounts and secure a controlling interest by tomorrow morning." Meridian Software Solutions was the primary software supplier for David's tech company. David's business model relied entirely on their code. Without that specific code, his entire operation was nothing more than a flashy graphic interface wrapping a completely hollow core. His company, Nexus Tech, projected an image of absolute dominance in the competitive software market. David spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on high-end marketing campaigns, leasing a massive glass-walled office in the most expensive commercial district in downtown Chicago, and hosting lavish corporate retreats for potential investors. He desperately wanted everyone to believe he was a visionary tech titan. He needed the world to view him as a self-made genius who possessed the golden touch, a man whose mere presence guaranteed massive financial returns. But behind those tinted glass walls and expensive marketing brochures, Nexus Tech was secretly bleeding money at an astonishing rate. I knew this because I had been quietly monitoring his financial filings through my firm for the past 8 months. David was burning through venture capital faster than his sales team could ever generate new revenue. His client churn rate was absolutely atrocious, largely because he focused entirely on acquiring new logos instead of actually servicing his existing accounts. His overhead costs were astronomical, artificially inflated by his absolute insistence on flying first class, staying in elite five-star hotels, and expensing lavish dinners just to maintain his wealthy persona. For the last 3 quarters, payroll had been a monthly panic behind closed doors. He was constantly shuffling funds between different corporate accounts, taking on high-interest short-term debt, and leveraging every single asset he had just to keep the lights on in his shiny office. The platinum credit card Patricia had handed to Madison at the steakhouse was essentially funded by a fragile house of cards that was already swaying violently in the wind. David's only viable exit strategy, his desperate gasp for financial oxygen, was a complete corporate buyout. He was banking his entire future, his inflated ego, and his fragile fortune on getting acquired by a massive private equity firm. And the specific firm he had set his sights on was Apex Holdings. It was a twisted stroke of dramatic irony. For months, David had been talking endlessly about Apex Holdings at the dinner table. He spoke about the firm with a level of reverence and deep respect he never showed to his own family. He admired their ruthless market strategies. He worshipped the mysterious founder and chief executive officer of Apex, a shadow figure, who never gave media interviews and completely avoided the public eye. David would pace around our kitchen drinking his expensive scotch, loudly bragging about how getting acquired by Apex would solidify his legacy. He claimed that joining the elite Apex portfolio would prove to all his detractors, especially my sharp brother-in-law Jamal, that he was truly the smartest man in the room. He was desperately trying to get acquired by Apex Holdings, not just to save his failing company, but to save his monumental ego from completely shattering. He needed the massive cash injection to clear his hidden mountain of debts, and he needed the prestige of the Apex brand name to validate his entire existence. My encrypted phone vibrated against the cool marble of the kitchen island. A new secure message from Harrison appeared on the screen. "Boss, the initial financial maneuvers for the Meridian software takeover are successfully underway," Harrison wrote. "Our proxy buyers are accumulating their shares aggressively under the radar. We will have a majority stake secured before the opening bell rings tomorrow morning. Also, you should definitely know that David just sent another frantic email to our acquisitions department at Apex. He is practically begging for a face-to-face meeting with the founder. He stated in his email that his company is primed for explosive growth and that he is willing to negotiate extremely favorable terms for an immediate buyout." His chief financial officer also attached a revised balance sheet, which we both know has been heavily manipulated to hide their massive operational debt. I read Harrison's message twice, feeling a deep, profoundly satisfying chill settle over me. David was actively cooking his corporate books. He was deliberately falsifying his financial statements to defraud my company into buying his worthless tech startup. He was committing federal corporate fraud, wrapping it up in a neat little presentation and sending it directly to my desk. "Let him keep sending the manipulated financials," I typed back to Harrison. "Document every single falsified report he submits to our team. We are going to build a watertight legal case of corporate fraud against him. Tell the acquisitions team to reply to his email today. Tell them the anonymous founder of Apex Holdings is very interested in his proposal. Tell them we are thoroughly reviewing his documents and will schedule a final in-person signing meeting very soon. Give him exactly enough hope to keep him fully committed to this specific deal. I want him to firmly believe his financial salvation is completely guaranteed." "Understood," Boss Harrison replied. He is going to walk right into the slaughterhouse with a massive smile on his face. I locked my encrypted phone and tucked it away securely inside my bag. I opened my cheap freelance laptop and stared at the blank Word document on the screen. The sheer magnitude of David's arrogance was almost breathtaking. He sat upstairs in the master suite, resting his head on silk pillowcases, completely convinced he was a master manipulator. He thought he was successfully hiding his catastrophic financial failures from his simple, naive wife. He thought he was brilliant enough to scam a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm into bailing out his sinking ship. He did not realize that the very firm he was trying to defraud was currently orchestrating a hostile takeover of his only essential software supplier. He did not realize that by tomorrow morning, his company would lose access to the basic code required to function. He did not realize that he was aggressively pushing a fraudulent acquisition deal toward a woman he treated like an unpaid servant. I listened to the sounds of Madison taking selfies in my former home office upstairs, the loud music echoing down the hallway. I thought about the sheer disrespect this family casually threw at me every single day. They demanded total submission. They demanded constant gratitude. They demanded I shrink myself to fit into the tiny, insignificant box they had built for me. They had no idea the box was actually a cage, and they had just locked themselves inside it with a starving lion. The financial trap was fully constructed, the bait was set, and David was sprinting eagerly toward his own total destruction. It was Thursday evening when David finally made his desperate move. He walked into the kitchen wearing a fresh, perfectly tailored charcoal suit, holding a thick manila folder under his arm. He walked straight to the liquor cabinet and poured himself a heavy glass of expensive scotch, trying his best to project an aura of total relaxation and absolute control. But I noticed the faint, uncontrollable tremor in his hand as he lifted the crystal glass to his lips. The sudden denial of his corporate bridge loan had clearly hit him hard. The walls were closing in on him and he was running out of oxygen. He set his glass down, walked over to the kitchen island where I was typing on my cheap laptop, and tossed the heavy folder onto the marble countertop. He offered me a warm, highly practiced smile. It was the exact same smile he used on television interviews and during aggressive pitch meetings. It was entirely fake. "Nora, I need you to do me a small favor." David began, his voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "We need to handle some basic administrative paperwork tonight." I closed my laptop and looked up at him, wearing my best expression of wide-eyed, innocent confusion. "What kind of paperwork, David?" He pulled out a sleek silver pen and laid it carefully next to the folder. "As you know, my company is in the final stages of a massive acquisition deal with Apex Holdings. They are a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm. The executives at Apex are incredibly meticulous. They require a complete restructuring of my personal and corporate assets to ensure total compliance before they sign the final acquisition check. It is highly complex financial stuff, Nora. You do not need to worry your pretty head about the complicated details." He opened the folder and slid two thick stacks of legal documents across the counter toward me. The bold black letters at the top of the first page read, "Post-nuptial agreement." The second document was a standard quitclaim deed for the sprawling luxury estate we were currently standing in. I looked down at the papers, my heart beating with a slow, rhythmic thrill. "What exactly are these, David?" I asked, maintaining my soft, subservient tone. "It is just a temporary legal formality," he lied smoothly, taking another sip of his scotch. "Because the acquisition is moving so fast, I need a short-term liquidity injection to scale up our server capacity and cover some unexpected operational costs before the Apex money clears. To do that, I need to take out a brief second mortgage on this house. The bank requires the property to be solely in my name to expedite the commercial loan approval. I just need you to sign the quitclaim deed relinquishing your marital claim to the property, and the post-nuptial agreement confirming that my corporate debts are entirely separated from you." He leaned across the kitchen island, placing his large hands flat on the marble, physically crowding my space. "I am trying to protect you, Nora," he said, looking deeply into my eyes with a masterfully crafted expression of loving concern. "If anything goes wrong with the acquisition, I do not want you burdened by my corporate liabilities, but I need to leverage the equity in this house immediately. I pay the mortgage. I built this life for us. You do not bring actual capital into our marriage, so this is the one specific way you can actually be a supportive wife. Just sign the papers, and once the Apex deal closes next month, I will be a tremendously wealthy man. I will make sure you are always taken care of. I stared at the black ink on the legal documents. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of his plan was almost beautiful in its wickedness. David was asking me to sign away my legal rights to my own home, completely stripping me of any financial protection so he could gamble our shelter on a failing business. He fully intended to leverage the roof over my head to save his own monumental ego. If his company went bankrupt, the bank would foreclose on the house, and I would be left entirely homeless and completely penniless. He was entirely willing to sacrifice my basic survival to keep his wealthy persona intact. But the absolute best part of his manipulative little speech was the underlying layer of financial fraud he was unknowingly committing. David genuinely believed he owned this sprawling suburban estate. He believed his name was on the master deed. He did not know that the Delaware Shell Corporation holding the absolute title to the property was completely controlled by me. By trying to secure a second mortgage on a property he did not legally own, David was preparing to submit falsified asset declarations to a federally insured bank. He was stepping beyond simple business failure. He was actively marching into the realm of federal bank fraud, and he was handing me the exact documents I needed to prove his criminal intent. David tapped the silver pen against the marble counter, his patience wearing dangerously thin. Come on, Nora. Do not make this difficult. I have a major conference call in 20 minutes. Just sign the pages where the yellow tabs are located. Any normal wife would have demanded to call a lawyer. Any normal woman would have read the fine print, realized her husband was financially abandoning her, and started screaming about betrayal and broken vows. But I was not a normal wife. I was his ultimate reckoning. I picked up the silver pen. I did not ask another question. I did not shed a single tear of betrayal. I simply smiled. My soft, compliant smile flipped directly to the yellow tabs and signed my name on every single line he requested. I signed the post-nuptial agreement. I signed the quitclaim deed. I handed him the keys to a kingdom that did not even exist. Thank you, David, I said softly, sliding the freshly signed documents back across the kitchen island. I always want to be a supportive wife. I trust you completely. David snatched the documents off the counter, a look of profound, arrogant relief washing over his face. He quickly gathered the papers back into the manila folder, treating them like a winning lottery ticket. Good girl, he sneered, his fake, loving persona instantly vanishing, now that he had what he wanted. He turned his back to me and walked toward his home office. See, that was not so hard. Just let the adults handle the real money, Nora. Go make us some dinner. I sat perfectly still at the kitchen island, watching him walk away with his fraudulent paperwork. He thought he had just secured a massive financial lifeline. He thought he had successfully manipulated his naive, dependent wife into giving up her only legal protection. He believed he was the smartest man in the entire world. I waited until I heard his heavy office door click shut. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out my encrypted smartphone. It was time to pull the trigger on the next phase of his total annihilation. Suddenly, the brass handle of his office door turned loudly. I smoothly slid the heavy black device under a stack of kitchen napkins, just a fraction of a second before David strode back into the kitchen. He had a smug, self-satisfied grin plastered across his face. In his hand, he held a single crisp sheet of paper that he had apparently separated from the thick manila folder. He walked straight over to the liquor cabinet and poured himself a second, much larger glass of his expensive scotch. He swirled the amber liquid, listening to the ice clink against the crystal, completely reveling in the sound of his own perceived success. I forgot the final addendum, David said, tossing the single page onto the marble island in front of me. The bank requires your initials on this specific clause to legally verify that you waive all rights to contest the new mortgage in a court of law. My legal team is incredibly thorough. I need your initials right there at the bottom. I looked down at the paper. I did not reach for the silver pen immediately. I simply sat there observing the man I had shared a bed with for years. David took a long, slow sip of his drink. The alcohol and the adrenaline of his fraudulent financial maneuver were clearly going straight to his head. He looked down at me, his eyes filled with a toxic mixture of pity and supreme arrogance. You know, Nora. David began leaning his hip against the counter and crossing his ankles. You should really consider yourself incredibly lucky. Most men in my position, men on the verge of securing a massive corporate buyout from a titan like Apex Holdings, would be looking to upgrade their personal lives. They would be looking for a wife with high society connections, someone who brings actual capital and prestige to the dinner table. I kept my hands folded neatly in my lap. I did not say a word. I let him dig his grave. But I am a generous man, David continued, gesturing expansively with his glass. I remember where I came from. I look at you typing away on your cheap laptop, making your little pennies from freelance writing, and I feel a profound sense of responsibility. You are a dependent Nora. Let us be completely honest about that fact right now. You will always be a dependent. Without my company, without my intense drive and my intellect, you would have absolutely nothing. You bring zero financial value to this partnership. You are for all intents and purposes a charity case that I graciously decided to fund. He smiled, a dark, patronizing expression that made my blood run absolutely cold. But like I said, I am incredibly generous, David whispered, leaning in closer so I could smell the sharp alcohol on his breath. When the Apex deal closes and I become a tremendously wealthy man, I will keep you around. You are quiet. You are obedient. You do not cause unnecessary drama, and you know exactly how to stay out of my way when I am conducting real business. As long as you remember your proper place in this house, I will make sure you always have a nice kitchen island to sit at. Just sign the addendum, Nora. He nudged the silver pen toward my hand. I looked at the pen. I looked at the legal document designed to strip away my last ounce of financial dignity. And then I looked directly into my husband's eyes. He was expecting tears. He was waiting for my lower lip to tremble. He desperately wanted me to break down to express profound gratitude for his toxic mercy, or perhaps to cry over his incredibly cruel assessment of my worth. He fed on emotional destruction. He needed to see my pain to validate his absolute power. I did not give him a single drop of satisfaction. I did not shed a tear. My heart beat with a slow, steady, mechanical rhythm. I felt nothing but absolute freezing clarity. I picked up the silver pen. The metal felt heavy and cold against my skin. I pressed the tip to the paper and fluidly traced my initials on the bottom line. My hand did not shake at all. My signature was perfectly bold and completely flawless. I slid the paper back across the marble counter. Thank you for your generosity, David, I said, my voice echoing with an icy, hollow compliance. I will always remember exactly where I stand in this marriage. David snatched the addendum off the counter, completely missing the lethal double meaning behind my words. He grinned widely, finishing the rest of his scotch in one triumphant gulp. He slammed the empty crystal glass down onto the marble. Good girl, he sneered. Now I have to jump on a major conference call with my chief financial officer to finalize the bank transfer. Keep the house quiet. He turned his back on me and walked away for the final time that evening. I sat perfectly still, listening as his heavy footsteps faded down the hallway. I heard the sharp click of his office door shutting tightly, followed by the loud sound of the deadbolt sliding into place. He was locking himself in his office to orchestrate what he genuinely believed was his ultimate victory. I waited 5 full minutes to ensure he was completely engrossed in his phone call. The house fell into a deep, heavy silence, broken only by the faint hum of the large refrigerator. I slowly reached under the stack of kitchen napkins and retrieved my encrypted smartphone. The screen flared to life, casting a harsh blue light across my face in the dim kitchen. The facade of the submissive dependent wife evaporated instantly. I was no longer Nora the copywriter. I was the predator holding the keys to the cage. I opened my secure connection to Harrison. The private equity machine was waiting for my direct command. Harrison! I typed, my thumbs moving with ruthless precision. David just signed the secondary mortgage papers. He is officially attempting to leverage a property he does not legally own. He is submitting the falsified asset declarations to the bank right now. I paused, taking a slow, deep breath, savoring the absolute perfection of the trap I had built. Contact our internal legal team. I continued typing. Have them draft the formal notice of eviction for the Delaware Shell Corporation. prepare the comprehensive dossier on his corporate fraud, including the manipulated balance sheets he submitted to our acquisitions department today. Do not alert the authorities quite yet. I want the pressure to build internally first. I want him to realize he is completely surrounded before we close the net." Harrison replied immediately, "The legal team is on standby, boss. The eviction notice will be drafted and ready for your authorization. We have successfully secured the controlling interest in Meridian Software Solutions. The proxy buyers executed the takeover flawlessly. David's company no longer has access to their primary software code. He is effectively out of business as of this minute, though he will not realize the servers are locked until his engineering team logs in tomorrow morning." "Excellent," I responded. "Let him sleep tonight believing he is a king. Let him dream of his massive acquisition. Tomorrow we burn his empire to the ground." I locked the device, the screen fading to black. I sat alone at the kitchen island, staring out the large bay windows into the dark, manicured backyard. My husband had just looked me in the eye and told me I was a worthless charity case who would never survive without his wealth. He had gloated about his supreme intellect while blindly signing documents that proved his criminal incompetence. He thought he was generously allowing me to exist in his world. He had no idea that his entire world was actually resting in the palm of my hand, and I was about to close my fist entirely. I stared at the dark screen of my phone for another long moment. Texting was incredibly efficient, but tonight required the absolute precision of a live conversation. I tapped the screen and dialed Harrison's secure line. It rang only once before his gravelly, professional voice filled my earpiece. "Good evening, Boss," Harrison said, his tone crisp and highly alert, despite the late hour. "I take it the paperwork has been signed." "Every single page," I replied, my voice steady and icy cold in the quiet kitchen. "He signed the post-nuptial agreement, and he signed the quitclaim deed. He genuinely believes he just secured absolute ownership of the estate." Harrison let out a low, rumbling laugh that vibrated through the speaker. The absolute, unmitigated arrogance of the man. "He really thinks he outsmarted you, did?" "He thinks I am a financial illiterate," I said, tracing the smooth edge of the marble island. "Let us talk about the property transfer, Harrison. I want to make sure every single trapdoor is securely locked and bolted before we drop the floor out from under him." "Everything is perfectly in place," Harrison confirmed, the sound of rapid typing echoing softly in the background. "5 years ago, when you first directed me to purchase this estate, we routed the transaction through a blind trust, which then funded Vanguard Properties, LLC. That Delaware shell corporation holds the absolute uncontestable master deed to the house. Your husband's name has never once been on the actual title." I smiled into the darkness, remembering the sheer absurdity of our early housing arrangement. When David and I were engaged, he insisted on buying a massive house to showcase his impending corporate success. He desperately wanted a mansion, but could not secure the jumbo mortgage because his tech company was already highly leveraged and bleeding cash. I had swooped in flawlessly, playing the role of the supportive, naive fiancé. I told him I had a distant, wealthy relative who could act as a private, silent lender. I secretly created Vanguard Properties, LLC, bought the estate entirely in cash, and drew up a fake private mortgage agreement for David to sign. For 5 long years, David proudly transferred his hefty monthly mortgage payment directly to Vanguard Properties. He bragged endlessly to his country club friends about paying down his massive estate. He told his elitist mother he was graciously putting a roof over my head. He threw it in my face every single time he wanted to win a domestic argument. He had absolutely no idea that every single dollar he transferred went directly into my personal offshore investment portfolio. He was effectively paying me a premium rent to live in my house entirely, funding my expanding empire with his own vanity. And the new loan, I asked, pulling my thoughts back to the present execution. "The second mortgage he just applied for to save his sinking company." "That is the absolute best part of this operation," Harrison said, the deep satisfaction evident in his voice. "He took the signed quitclaim deed to his commercial lender this afternoon to secure a highly toxic short-term bridge loan. The bank saw the massive risk. His company financials are a complete mess, but they saw the supposed equity in the house and approved the underwriting. They packaged that toxic debt immediately, wanting it off their ledger as fast as possible. Did we acquire it? I asked, my pulse quickening with anticipation. Apex Holdings purchases the debt package less than an hour ago, Harrison confirmed proudly. We bought his new bridge loan at a steep discount because the bank wanted the risk off their books immediately. Nora, you are now the primary deed holder of the physical property through the LLC, and Apex Holdings is the sole owner of his highly toxic corporate debt. We literally own the ground he walks on, and we own the heavy iron chains holding his company down. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the staggering magnitude of the trap wash over me. David had aggressively leveraged everything he had to secure a cash injection that would only delay his inevitable bankruptcy by a few short weeks. And he had handed that massive leverage directly to the private equity firm he was desperately trying to impress. He is going to use that bridge loan money to fund the extravagant barbecue this weekend, I said, my voice dropping to a sharp whisper. He wants to throw a massive networking party to impress the anonymous Apex executives. He wants to show off his fake wealth before the acquisition. He is throwing a party with your money to impress you while trying to defraud you, Harrison summarized perfectly. The irony is almost suffocating. What are your exact orders regarding the corporate software lockout we initiated? Keep Meridian's software operational for exactly 48 more hours, I instructed coldly. Do not let his engineering team see the system lock out tomorrow morning. Let him spend the bridge loan cash on his lavish barbecue. Let him build his arrogant confidence to the absolute maximum peak. I want him surrounded by his peers, his elitist family, and his business partners when the brutal reality of his situation begins to set in. You want to dismantle him publicly, Harrison noted. I want him to experience the exact same level of profound humiliation he has inflicted on me for years, I replied smoothly. He uses an audience to make me feel incredibly small. I am going to use an audience to strip away everything he thinks makes him a king. Understood perfectly. We will hold the software kill switch until you give the green light. The legal team is standing by to file the formal eviction notice and the federal fraud report the absolute moment you say the word. Thank you, Harrison. Have the acquisition team send him a formal email first thing tomorrow morning. Tell him Apex Holdings is thrilled with his proposal and that the founder intends to sign the acquisition papers in person on Monday morning. Make him truly believe he has crossed the finish line. It will be sent at exactly 8 in the morning, Harrison promised. Get some rest, boss. You have a massive weekend ahead of you. I ended the call and slipped the encrypted phone securely back into my hidden bag compartment. I stood up from the kitchen island and walked slowly through the massive, quiet house. I ran my hand along the expensive marble countertops, touched the custom oak cabinets, and looked up at the imported crystal chandeliers. David walked through these halls like a conquering emperor. He looked down on me because I wore basic clothes and stayed quiet. He mistook my strategic silence for weakness. He mistook my endless patience for sheer stupidity. He thought his aggressive corporate tactics made him an apex predator. He did not realize he was just a noisy, clumsy animal wandering blindly into a meticulously constructed snare. I walked to the base of the grand staircase and looked up toward the second floor. Madison's terrible pop music had finally stopped. David's home office was completely silent. They were sleeping peacefully, dreaming of unlimited platinum credit cards and multi-billion-dollar acquisitions. They were dreaming of a future where they could finally cast me aside completely, keeping me around only as a convenient servant to witness their unearned glory. I turned off the kitchen lights, plunging the main floor into total darkness. The shadow move was completely finished. The financial mechanisms were locked securely in place. There was absolutely no way out for him now. David had built his own guillotine, sharpened the heavy blade himself, and willingly placed his head right on the chopping block. All I had to do now was wait for the perfect moment to let the rope go. Friday morning arrived with a chaotic frenzy of delivery trucks and event planners swarming the circular driveway. David had spared absolutely no expense for his ultimate networking event. Huge white canopies were erected across the pristine rear lawn. Industrial smokers were wheeled onto the stone patio, filling the air with the rich scent of burning hickory. Cases of premium champagne, imported Wagyu beef, and exotic seafood were carried into the house by a small army of catering staff. He was aggressively burning through the toxic bridge loan money faster than I could have ever predicted. David buzzed through the house like a hyperactive hornet. He barked orders at the florists, yelled at the lighting technicians, and constantly checked his reflection in every passing mirror. He had sent an open invitation to the acquisitions department at Apex Holdings, desperate to showcase his fabricated wealth and highly inflated social standing. He genuinely believed that if he threw a party lavish enough, the anonymous executives would be entirely blinded by his luxurious lifestyle and sign the final paperwork without asking any difficult financial questions. I spent the early hours of Saturday morning quietly navigating the chaos. I wore a simple pair of dark jeans and a faded gray oversized sweater, keeping my hair tied back in a plain knot. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and leaned against the marble kitchen island, watching David orchestrate his own financial funeral. He stormed into the kitchen around noon, his face flushed with frantic energy. He wore a crisp, tailored linen suit perfectly suited for a wealthy suburban weekend. He stopped when he saw me standing by the espresso machine. His eyes raked over my plain clothes, his upper lip curling into a profound sneer of absolute disgust. "Nora, what exactly are you wearing?" David demanded, his voice sharp and incredibly condescending. I looked down at my simple sweater. "I am just having my morning coffee, David. I plan to change before your guests begin arriving at 3. "Do not bother changing," he snapped, stepping closer and lowering his voice so the catering staff would not overhear. "I need you to stay out of sight today. I have invited extremely high-level investors, including potential representatives from Apex Holdings. These people are titans of industry. They expect to see success, elegance, and power. You look like a thrift store employee who wandered into the wrong neighborhood. Your entire vibe is completely embarrassing to me." I set my coffee mug down on the marble counter. "You want me to hide in my own home during a party? It is a corporate networking event. Nora, not a neighborhood block party." David shot back, his tone dripping with sheer arrogance. "I'm about to close a multi-billion-dollar acquisition. I cannot have you wandering around the patio making awkward small talk about your little freelance writing projects. You bring absolutely zero social value to this gathering. You will only make me look like a man who settled for mediocrity." He pointed a rigid finger toward the massive double doors of the industrial pantry. "I need you to stay in the kitchen and the pantry area," David ordered. "Act as the liaison for the catering staff. Make sure the hot appetizers are rotating properly and the champagne flutes remain full. If anyone asks, just tell them you prefer managing the domestic side of the event. Keep your head down, do your job, and do not ruin my image." I held his gaze. I did not argue. I did not demand to be treated like an equal partner. I simply absorbed the breathtaking magnitude of his cruelty. He was actively erasing me from his public life, treating me like a hired servant, all to impress a company that I entirely owned. He wanted to lock me in the kitchen to ensure I did not embarrass him in front of my own employees. "I understand perfectly, David," I said, my voice smooth and dangerously calm. "I will manage the catering staff. I will stay completely out of your way." "Good," David sneered, turning his back on me to inspect a floral arrangement on the dining table. "Just make sure the Wagyu sliders are served exactly at 4. Madison strutted into the kitchen moments later wearing a designer sundress that cost more than most people's monthly rent. She grabbed a bottle of imported sparkling water from the refrigerator, looking me up and down with identical disdain. "Dad is right, you know," Madison smirked, leaning against the counter. "You really do not fit in with this crowd. My friends are coming over later, and their parents are actual executives and minor celebrities. Just stay in the kitchen, Nora. It is where you belong anyway." She laughed loudly, a sharp grating sound, and walked out to the patio to start filming her social media videos. I stood alone in the kitchen, the air humming with the frantic energy of the hired staff. A quiet, terrifying sense of peace washed over me. They wanted me in the kitchen. They wanted me playing the role of the silent, obedient maid. It was the absolute perfect vantage point. From the kitchen, I had a clear line of sight to the entire backyard. I could monitor every single guest watch, every arrogant handshake, and observe David digging his grave deeper with every expensive bottle of champagne he popped. I reached into my pocket and felt the cold, hard edge of my encrypted phone. I knew the Apex executives were not coming today. Harrison had strictly forbidden our acquisitions team from attending this absurd vanity project. However, I had instructed Harrison to send one low-level junior analyst dressed in a cheap suit just to observe the sheer desperation of David's display. David would spend the entire afternoon frantically searching the crowd for an apex titan, entirely unaware that the titan was standing right inside his kitchen, making sure the hot appetizers were rotating properly. The first guests began arriving exactly at 3 o'clock. The driveway filled with luxury cars, women in expensive summer dresses, and men in casual tailored suits spilled onto the manicured lawn. The string quartet David had hired began playing soft classical music near the infinity pool. I tied a plain black apron around my waist, seamlessly blending in with the catering staff. I arranged a silver tray of complicated hors d'oeuvres and stepped back into the shadows of the pantry. I watched through the glass doors as David worked the crowd. He shook hands, slapped shoulders, and laughed with a booming artificial confidence. He was putting on the performance of a lifetime, projecting the image of a wealthy, untouchable king. He gestured wildly with a crystal glass of scotch, spinning tales of his technological brilliance and upcoming market dominance. Every detail of the party was a carefully orchestrated lie. The imported floral arrangements, the custom ice sculptures, the private bartenders pouring top-shelf liquor. All of it was financed by the highly toxic bridge loan he had secured by fraudulently leveraging my real estate. He was literally partying on my dime, trying to attract my firm, while banishing me to the kitchen like an unwanted stray dog. I adjusted the plain black apron around my waist and began directing a young waiter toward the pool area. I checked my encrypted phone one last time. Harrison had sent a brief final confirmation. The legal documents were completely finalized. The eviction notice was signed. The federal fraud dossier was compiled, indexed, and ready for immediate submission. The guillotine blade was hoisted to the absolute top of the scaffold. David caught my eye through the glass doors of the kitchen. He pointed a sharp finger at his empty glass, then pointed aggressively at me, mouthing the word refill, before turning back to his wealthy guests with a broad, fake smile. I picked up a fresh bottle of his preferred expensive scotch. I walked out onto the patio, playing my assigned role flawlessly. I was the maid. I was the silent servant. I poured the amber liquid into his glass, watching the sheer arrogance radiate from his pores. He did not even look at me as he took the drink from my hand. He did not know that his crown was made of thin paper and his castle was currently up in invisible flames. The clock was ticking down the final hours. The trap was fully set. The fire was about to reach the powder keg. I stepped back into the kitchen, retreating to my assigned position among the bustling catering staff. The heavy glass doors swung shut behind me, instantly muting the loud chatter and clinking crystal of David's desperate vanity project. I placed the empty scotch bottle into a recycling bin and wiped my hands on the plain black apron tied around my waist. The kitchen was a whirlwind of activity. Private chefs shouted commands over the sizzle of searing beef, and waiters rushed past me carrying massive silver platters. I stood near the industrial refrigerator, blending perfectly into the background, exactly as my husband had commanded. Nora. The voice was low, urgent, and completely out of place in the chaotic kitchen. I turned away from the prep station to see Jamal standing near the swinging doors. He wore a sharp navy blue suit, looking every bit the formidable corporate attorney he was, but his face was tight with genuine concern. He glanced over his shoulder, making absolutely sure David was nowhere nearby, before striding directly toward me. "Jamal," I said, keeping my voice soft to avoid drawing the attention of the catering manager. "What are you doing in here?" David expects all the family members to be out on the patio mingling with his investors. I do not care what David expects right now, Jamal replied, his dark eyes scanning my face with intense scrutiny. We need to talk. Right now. Where can we speak privately? I gestured toward the massive walk-in pantry at the back of the kitchen. I led him inside and pulled the heavy wooden door shut, plunging us into the quiet, cool air filled with the scent of dry goods and imported spices. The thick walls blocked out the noise of the kitchen completely. Jamal did not waste a single second on pleasantries. He reached inside his tailored jacket and pulled out a folded stack of financial documents. He smoothed the papers out on a metal shelving unit, tapping his index finger aggressively against a column of highlighted numbers. Nora, listen to me very carefully. Jamal began, his voice dropping to a serious, authoritative register. I have been quietly looking into David's business filings since that disaster of a dinner at the steakhouse last week. The way he was talking about capital, the way he was throwing money around while demanding you submit to his mother. My instincts told me something was fundamentally wrong with his narrative. I looked down at the papers. They were copies of Nexus Tech's quarterly expense reports placed side by side with the highly manipulated balance sheets David had recently submitted to his commercial lender. Jamal had successfully bypassed David's corporate firewall and pulled the actual internal numbers. He was brilliant. What exactly am I looking at, Jamal? I asked, maintaining my persona of the naive, uneducated wife. You are looking at federal corporate fraud, Nora, Jamal stated bluntly, his gaze locked onto mine to ensure I grasped the gravity of the situation. David is completely cooking his books. He is creating fake client accounts and artificially inflating his revenue projections to hide the fact that his company is bleeding cash at an uncontrollable rate. He is heavily over-leveraged. He is paying off short-term high-interest debts with new bridge loans. It is a classic Ponzi structure, and it is going to collapse spectacularly. I kept my expression perfectly neutral, letting my eyes widen just a fraction to simulate shock. He is trying to get acquired by a massive private equity firm called Apex Holdings. Jamal continued tapping the fraudulent balance sheet. He submitted these exact fabricated numbers to their acquisitions department this week. He is actively attempting to defraud a multi-billion-dollar financial institution. Nora, these people do not play games. When Apex does their final due diligence and uncovers this massive deception, they will not just walk away from the deal, they will completely destroy him. The Securities and Exchange Commission will get involved. The federal authorities will tear his entire life apart. Jamal grabbed my shoulders gently, his expression softening from the aggressive lawyer into a deeply concerned brother-in-law. I know you think David provides a stable life for you, Jamal said softly. I know Patricia makes you feel like you are financially dependent on him, but you need to wake up right now. The wealth he is flaunting out on that patio is entirely fake. This massive estate, those sports cars, the platinum credit cards he hands out to his daughter, all of it is built on a mountain of toxic debt and illegal accounting. When the walls cave in, and they will cave in, very soon, he is going to take you down with him. I looked at Jamal, feeling a profound wave of genuine gratitude wash over me. In a family completely obsessed with status appearances and cruelty, Jamal was the only person who possessed actual integrity. He had spent his own valuable time investigating my arrogant husband simply because he wanted to protect me. He genuinely believed I was a helpless, struggling freelance writer about to be crushed by a federal financial scandal. He was risking his own family standing and potentially his marriage to Rachel just to warn me to run. Nora, you have to protect yourself legally, Jamal urged, stepping back and pulling a business card from his pocket. I cannot represent you because it is a massive conflict of interest with the family. But this card belongs to one of the most ruthless asset protection attorneys in Chicago. You need to call her on Monday morning. You need to file for legal separation and freeze your personal bank accounts before David tries to drain them to cover his collapsing margins. I took the business card from his hand. The thick embossed paper felt heavy with his noble intentions. What about the house? I asked, testing the waters to see exactly how much he had discovered. Jamal sighed, running a hand over his short hair. That is the strangest part of this whole mess. I tried to pull the deed to see if you were listed as a joint owner so we could force a sale, But David does not actually own this property. It is registered to a Delaware shell corporation. He is just a tenant. If he defaults on his business loans, the bank cannot take the house, but you also have zero equity to claim in the divorce. You need to pack your bags and get out of here before the federal agents show up with a warrant for his arrest. I looked down at the fraudulent financial printouts resting on the metal shelf. Jamal had pieced together 90% of the puzzle. He knew David was a fraud. He knew the company was failing. He knew the house belonged to a phantom entity. The only piece of the puzzle he was missing was the fact that the phantom entity holding the deed to the house and the multi-billion-dollar firm David was currently trying to defraud were both entirely controlled by the quiet woman standing right in front of him. I carefully folded the documents and handed them back to Jamal. I slipped the attorney's business card into the pocket of my black catering apron. "Thank you, Jamal," I said, my voice dropping its naive tone and taking on a sharp, commanding edge that caused him to blink in sudden confusion. "I appreciate your fierce loyalty more than you will ever know. You are a truly good man, but I promise you, I do not need a divorce attorney to protect my assets from David." Jamal frowned, leaning forward. "Nora, you are not listening to me. He is committing federal fraud. You have no legal protection here." I held up a hand, silencing the brilliant corporate lawyer with a single authoritative gesture. I took a slow breath, deciding exactly how much of the truth I needed to reveal to ensure the only decent man in this family survived the incoming blast. Jamal stared at my raised hand. The profound confusion on his face was palpable. I lowered my hand slowly and met his dark eyes with a level of chilling intensity he had likely only ever seen from senior managing partners at his elite law firm. "Jamal, I need you to listen to me very carefully," I said, my voice resonating with an icy calm that completely stripped away every single ounce of the timid, submissive wife persona I had worn for 3 long years. "You are an exceptional corporate lawyer. Your professional instincts regarding David's immense financial instability are absolutely flawless. But your underlying assumption that I am merely a helpless casualty trapped in his sinking ship is entirely incorrect." He blinked, taking a half-step backward into the metal shelving unit behind him. The crisp lines of his tailored navy suit shifted as he crossed his arms, his legal mind working furiously to process my sudden shift in demeanor. "Nora, what exactly are you saying?" he asked, his voice tight with confusion. "He illegally leveraged the estate. He is committing massive federal fraud right under your nose." "I am fully aware of his fraudulent balance sheets," I replied smoothly, taking a deliberate step closer to him. "I have known about his highly toxic bridge loans for months. I know his client churn rate is absolutely disastrous. And I know with absolute certainty that he does not own this house. I know he is merely a renting tenant paying a premium monthly lease into an offshore account owned by a Delaware shell corporation." I watched his eyes dart rapidly back and forth as he processed my words. "You looked at the public property records, Jamal," I continued, keeping my tone deadly even. "But you stopped looking when you hit the corporate veil. If you had dug just a little bit deeper past the registered agent, past the blind trust, you would have found something truly terrifying for your arrogant brother-in-law." I watched the exact moment the realization finally hit him. Jamal was a brilliant man, and the puzzle pieces snapped together in his mind with violent speed. He looked down at my cheap, oversized sweater, my plain black catering apron, and then back up to my face. He finally saw the apex predator hiding in plain sight. "You." Jamal breathed the single word barely escaping his lips as shock washed over his features. "You are Vanguard Properties. You actually own this entire estate." I offered him a small, razor-sharp smile. "David has been paying my personal offshore accounts to live in my house since the exact day we got married. And that massive private equity firm he is desperately trying to defraud today, with those fake numbers, Apex Holdings." I let the question hang in the cool, spice-scented air of the pantry. Jamal swallowed hard. The blood drained slightly from his face as the entire picture snapped into brutal, crystal-clear focus. "You are Apex," he stated, phrasing it as an absolute certainty rather than a question. "I am," I confirmed quietly. "Which is exactly why I am telling you this right now." You are the only person in this highly toxic family who ever treated me with genuine human respect. You fiercely defended me against Patricia at the steakhouse when David cowardly refused to speak up. You risked your own professional standing today to sneak into this kitchen and warn a woman you thought was completely defenseless. You are a truly good man, Jamal. And because you are a good man, I am giving you exactly one piece of advice. I reached into the hidden pocket of my plain gray sweater and pulled out my encrypted smartphone. I tapped the screen, checking the time. It was currently 4:15 in the afternoon. Out on the patio, the lavish barbecue was reaching its peak volume. The string quartet was playing, and David was likely pouring another glass of expensive champagne he could not afford. At exactly 7:30 tonight, I said, locking my eyes intensely with his, the entire illusion David has built is going to shatter into a million pieces. The blast radius of his financial and social destruction is going to be massive. It will utterly decimate his tech company, his personal wealth, and the social standing of anyone foolish enough to be standing beside him when the truth finally comes out. I took the fraudulent financial documents from his hands, neatly folded them, and slid them safely back into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket. Find Rachel. I instructed, my tone leaving absolutely no room for debate or negotiation. Tell her you have a massive emergency legal brief to file for a client. Tell her you have a severe migraine. Make up whatever excuse you need to get your wife into your car. But at exactly 7:30, I want you and Rachel driving far away from this property. Do not stay for the evening toast. Do not linger for the dessert course. Just take her and leave. Jamal stood perfectly still for a long moment. The formidable corporate attorney had been completely neutralized by the sheer magnitude of the trap he had just discovered. He looked at me with a profound mixture of shock, awe, and deep professional respect. He realized that the quiet woman washing dirty laundry just a few days ago was about to orchestrate the most ruthless corporate execution he would ever witness in his lifetime. He brought this entirely on himself, Jamal said quietly, his voice finally steadying as he accepted the reality of the situation. He built his own gallows. He did, I agreed. And tonight I am pulling the lever. Go back out to the patio, Jamal. Enjoy the expensive champagne my husband bought with fraudulent loans. And remember the time. 7:30, Jamal repeated, nodding firmly. He buttoned his navy jacket, straightening his posture as he prepared to step back into the charade. It was an absolute privilege meeting the real you, Nora. Apex Holdings is incredibly lucky to have you at the helm. With that, he turned and pushed open the heavy wooden door, stepping back out into the chaotic, noisy kitchen. I watched him weave expertly through the rushing catering staff and exit through the glass doors onto the sunlit patio, moving with the quiet urgency of a man escaping a burning building. I remained in the cool, quiet pantry for a few minutes longer. I needed to center my mind entirely. The sharp adrenaline of revealing my true identity, even just a tiny fraction of it, sent a thrilling rush through my veins. For 3 long years, I had aggressively shrunk myself to fit into David's suffocating patriarchal mold. I had endured Patricia's vicious, drunken insults. I had cleaned up Madison's deliberate, cruel messes. I had played the silent, grateful peasant while secretly financing their entire royal delusion. But that era of submission was officially over. The countdown clock was loudly ticking in my head. I adjusted my plain black catering apron and smoothed down my oversized sweater. I took one deep, steadying breath, inhaling the scent of dry goods and imported spices one last time. When I pushed the heavy pantry door open and stepped back into the blinding fluorescent lights of the kitchen, I was completely ready for the final act of this miserable marriage. The calm before the storm had officially ended. I took my place beside the stainless steel preparation counters, blending seamlessly back into the frantic rhythm of the catering crew. The kitchen door swung open constantly, bringing bursts of loud laughter and the heavy scent of expensive cigars from the patio. I picked up a silver tray loaded with fresh crystal glasses of dark, full-bodied red wine, intending to hand it off to one of the rushing servers. Before I could hand the tray over, the double glass doors burst open with a violent shove. Madison marched into the kitchen, followed closely by three of her teenage friends. They were a flock of entitled, heavily perfumed high schoolers, clutching expensive smartphones and speaking at top volume. Madison looked flushed and incredibly annoyed, complaining loudly about the summer heat and the boring older crowd outside on the lawn. She stopped abruptly when she saw me standing near the center island holding the silver tray. Her eyes instantly narrowed. A malicious, predatory gleam washed over her face. She looked at her friends silently, signaling them to watch. She had an audience now, and she desperately needed to perform her royal routine. Nora Madison snapped, striding directly toward me with her chin held obnoxiously high. "Why are you just standing around doing absolutely nothing? My friends are extremely thirsty, and you are hoarding all the drinks." I kept my expression completely blank. I stood perfectly still, balancing the heavy silver tray of wine glasses. "There are plenty of servers outside to assist you, Madison," I said evenly. "I am just organizing the next rotation for the staff." Madison scoffed, stepping aggressively into my personal space. "You are not organizing anything. You are just hiding in here because Dad told you not to embarrass him in front of the important corporate investors." Her friends giggled behind her, pulling out their phones to eagerly record the interaction. Madison thrived on their validation. She reached out quickly and grabbed the stem of a wine glass from the edge of my tray. She did not just lift the glass. She deliberately hooked her manicured fingers under the silver rim and jerked it violently upward. Gravity took immediate effect. 4 full glasses of dark red wine tipped backward, shattering violently against my chest. The deep crimson liquid splashed across my face, soaking instantly into my plain gray sweater and staining my dark jeans. Sharp pieces of broken crystal scattered across the expensive kitchen tile. The entire kitchen went completely silent. The catering staff froze in place. The private chef stopped chopping vegetables. Every single person stared at us in absolute shock. Madison threw her head back and let out a very loud, incredibly mocking laugh. "Oops," she sneered, her cruel voice echoing in the dead, quiet room. "I guess you should be more careful, Nora. But do not worry about the huge mess. You are basically the maid anyway, so cleaning up garbage is exactly what you are really good at. Go grab a mop now." The red wine dripped slowly from my ruined sweater, pooling with the shattered crystal at my feet. The entire kitchen remained frozen in a suffocating silence. The catering staff watched with wide eyes, holding their collective breath, waiting for the humiliated stepmother to either burst into tears or flee from the room in absolute shame. That was the predictable script I had followed perfectly for 3 years. That was the exact reaction Madison fully expected as she stood there with her phone recording, ready to capture my total submission for her internet followers. She thrust her hand forward, jabbing her perfectly manicured index finger mere inches from my nose. "Do your job, maid." Madison barked, her voice shrill and commanding. Something fundamental shifted inside the room. The meticulously crafted illusion of Nora, the struggling, dependent copywriter, completely dissolved into the cold air. I did not step back. I did not lower my gaze. My hand shot forward with the blinding speed of a striking snake. I caught her extended index finger, wrapping my hand around it in a vice grip that instantly halted her arrogant laughter. I did not bend her finger backward, but the sheer unyielding physical pressure of my hold made her gasp in sudden, genuine shock. Her phone dropped to her side as her friends stumbled backward, completely unprepared for my physical defiance. Madison tried to yank her hand away, but my grip was made of pure iron. I stepped directly into her personal space, closing the distance until I was looking straight down into her suddenly terrified eyes. The smug, entitled teenager vanished entirely, replaced by a panicked child who suddenly realized she had just kicked a sleeping bear. "Watch your mouth," I said. My voice was a lethal, icy whisper that cut through the silence of the kitchen like a razor blade. It held no anger, no hysteria, and absolutely no fear. It carried the chilling, absolute authority of a woman who completely controlled a massive financial empire. It was a commanding tone of voice Madison had never heard in her entire privileged life. It promised total destruction. "You are a deeply spoiled, profoundly ignorant little girl living in a fragile glass house." I continued, leaning in closer, so only she could hear the full crushing weight of my words. You think a plastic credit card and your father's fake money make you untouchable. You are going to learn a very brutal lesson about how the real world operates, and you are going to learn it tonight. Do not ever speak to me again. I released her finger with a sharp, dismissive flick of my wrist. Madison stumbled backward, her chest heaving as she instinctively rubbed her hand. The blood had completely drained from her face. She looked at me not with her usual disdain, but with pure, unfiltered terror. She opened her mouth to scream for her father, desperate to summon her ultimate protector to destroy me. But before she could even make a sound, the heavy glass doors leading out to the patio swung open violently. David stormed into the kitchen, his face flushed with alcohol and fury. Several high-profile guests from the patio lingered right behind him, peering through the open glass double doors with morbid curiosity. He had clearly seen me grab his daughter's hand through the large window. Madison instantly recognized her rescue. She let out a dramatic, piercing wail and threw herself into her father's arms, burying her face in his tailored linen suit jacket. "Dad," she sobbed loudly, pointing her trembling finger back at me. "She attacked me. I just asked her to clean up the mess she made, and she grabbed me and threatened me." David did not ask for my side of the story. He did not care about the shattered glass covering the tile or the dark red wine completely soaking my clothes. He only saw his submissive dependent wife daring to exert authority over his golden child in front of an important corporate audience. His fragile, toxic ego violently rejected the entire sight. He gently pushed Madison behind him to protect her, then closed the distance between us with heavy, aggressive strides. Before I could even brace myself, David swung his arm. His heavy hand struck my left cheek with a sharp, explosive crack that echoed loudly off the stainless steel kitchen appliances. The sheer physical force of the blow snapped my head violently to the side. My ears rang instantly. A hot, stinging numbness spread rapidly across my skin, followed immediately by the sharp metallic taste of blood pooling in the corner of my mouth. The catering staff gasped collectively, stepping backward in fear. The wealthy guests standing at the patio doors fell into a stunned, horrified silence. "You ungrateful, psychotic freeloader!" David roared, the veins in his neck bulging as he unleashed years of suppressed contempt. "How dare you put your hands on my daughter? I give you a roof over your head. I feed you. I clothe you. I let you live in my magnificent house like an absolute queen, and you treat my family like this. Get out. Get out of my house right now before I call the police." I slowly turned my head back to face him. My cheek was burning fiercely and the skin was already beginning to swell, but my heart rate was incredibly slow and perfectly steady. I tasted the blood on my bottom lip. I looked at the furious, arrogant man standing in front of me, breathing heavily, entirely convinced he had just asserted his absolute dominance and put me back in my proper place. I did not raise a trembling hand to my injured cheek. I did not let a single tear form in my eyes. I did not scream, flinch, beg for forgiveness, or offer a single word of defense. I remained dead silent. I looked right through him, stripping away his expensive suit and his fake corporate empire, seeing nothing but a pathetic, doomed man who had just handed me the final necessary piece of ammunition to destroy his entire life without a shred of mercy. The absolute silence I offered in return was far more terrifying than any scream could ever be. I held his gaze for 10 agonizingly slow seconds. The silence in the kitchen stretched so thin it felt like it might shatter all over again. David's chest heaved with ragged breaths. His fist was still clenched at his side, trembling slightly with the adrenaline of his own violence. He was waiting for the breakdown. He was waiting for the sobbing apology for me to drop to my knees and beg him not to throw me out into the street. He desperately needed the wealthy audience watching from the patio to see him as a powerful, commanding force who tolerated zero disrespect in his castle. I simply blinked, wiped a single drop of blood from the corner of my mouth with the back of my hand and turned around. I did not rush. I did not run. I walked with the deliberate, measured stride of a woman who owned every single piece of ground she stepped on. My practical shoes crunched loudly over the broken crystal of the shattered wine glasses. The dark red wine soaked my clothes, but I carried myself as if I were wearing a king's armor. The catering staff parted instantly, pressing themselves against the stainless steel appliances to give me a wide, clear path. No one breathed. No one whispered. I pushed through the heavy swinging doors, leaving the kitchen and stepping into the grand foyer. Behind me, I could hear the sudden explosion of chaotic murmurs from the patio guests. I heard David loudly attempting to control the narrative, his voice booming with forced, jovial authority as he ordered the waiters to clean up the mess and offered the investors fresh drinks. He was frantically trying to glue his shattered facade back together. I placed my hand on the polished oak banister and began the long climb up the sweeping staircase. The house felt entirely different now. It was no longer a stage for my performance. It was a tomb waiting to be sealed. I walked past Madison's newly claimed influencer dressing room. The bright vanity lights were still glaring, illuminating the expensive velvet ottoman and the brass clothing racks she had purchased with her father's toxic debt. I did not stop. I continued down the wide corridor and pushed open the heavy double doors of the master suite. The bedroom was a monument to David's monumental vanity. Massive vaulted ceilings, imported silk drapery, and a sprawling custom bed dominating the center of the room. I walked straight past the walk-in closet that held thousands of dollars worth of designer dresses and handbags David had purchased to make me look like a suitable corporate wife. I did not want a single thread of his fake empire touching my skin. I moved to the far corner of the room and pulled a simple, durable black canvas duffel bag from the bottom shelf of a storage cabinet. I unzipped it and began packing with cold, robotic efficiency. I did not pack clothes. I did not pack toiletries. I only packed the items that tethered me to my true identity. I placed my passport inside. I added my original birth certificate, my private banking ledgers, and the legal incorporation documents for Vanguard Properties. I reached into the hidden pocket of my sweater and retrieved my encrypted smartphone, dropping it safely into the side compartment of the duffel bag. Then I walked over to the pristine glass surface of David's expensive modern nightstand. I looked at my left hand. The diamond engagement ring and the matching platinum wedding band glittered under the recessed ceiling lights. They were beautiful, heavy, and completely meaningless. I slid the rings off my finger. The metal felt cold as it left my skin. I placed them deliberately in the exact center of the glass nightstand. They sat there catching the light, a perfect and final symbol of a marriage that had just legally and financially expired. I zipped the black duffel bag closed and slung the heavy canvas strap over my shoulder. I caught my reflection in the massive floor-to-ceiling mirror near the bedroom door. My gray sweater was heavily stained with dark wine. A sharp, angry red welt was rapidly blooming across my left cheek, and dried blood marked the corner of my mouth. But my eyes were entirely clear. The submissive, frightened copywriter was completely dead. The chief executive officer of Apex Holdings had fully awakened. I walked out of the master suite and descended the grand staircase for the absolute last time. The house was quiet in the front, all the chaotic party noise contained to the backyard patio. I walked across the marble foyer, my footsteps echoing against the high ceilings. I reached out, grasped the heavy brass handle of the front door, and pulled it open. The cool, crisp evening air hit my face, instantly washing away the suffocating artificial scent of David's expensive cologne that permeated the house. I stepped out onto the wide stone porch and let the heavy front door click shut firmly behind me. I did not look back at the sprawling suburban estate. I looked straight ahead at the long circular driveway. Parked silently at the curb, directly in front of the manicured lawn, was a massive, heavily armored black sport utility vehicle. The engine idled with a low, powerful hum. The tinted windows obscured the interior entirely. I had initiated an emergency extraction protocol through my secure network the moment I left the kitchen. Harrison always kept a private security detail on standby whenever I attended David's volatile corporate events, waiting patiently in the shadows, just in case the illusion ever shattered. A man in a sharp black suit immediately stepped out from the driver's side. He moved with swift professional precision, opening the heavy rear passenger door and standing at strict attention. He did not ask questions about the wine on my clothes or the bruise forming on my face. He simply waited for his employer to enter the vehicle. I walked down the stone steps and crossed the driveway. I slid into the plush, immaculate leather seat of the vehicle. The door closed solidly behind me, instantly shutting out the sounds of the suburban neighborhood and enclosing me in absolute secure silence. The driver returned to the front seat and smoothly shifted the vehicle into gear. We pulled away from the curb, leaving the estate and the lavish barbecue far behind in the rearview mirror. I settled back into the deep leather seat and unzipped the side compartment of my duffel bag. I pulled out my encrypted smartphone. The screen illuminated the dark interior of the cabin, casting a sharp blue glow over the dried blood on my lip. I bypassed the security protocols and opened a direct, highly secure voice channel to Harrison. The line connected immediately. Harrison was waiting, fully aware that an extraction team had just been dispatched to my location. "Are you secure, boss?" Harrison asked, his gravelly voice tight with an uncharacteristic layer of intense concern. Security notified me of the emergency extraction. "Do we need to route you to a private medical facility?" "I am perfectly secure, Harrison," I replied, my voice steady, cold, and echoing with absolute unforgiving authority. "And I do not need a hospital." I looked out the tinted window as the black vehicle sped down the highway, heading directly toward the gleaming skyscrapers of downtown Chicago. The fake life was over. The game of hiding in the shadows was officially concluded. David had made his choice in front of a crowd of witnesses. He had chosen his arrogant daughter, his fragile ego, and his toxic pride over his wife. He had struck me to prove his power, completely unaware that he had just struck a woman who held his entire existence in the palm of her hand. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, feeling the raw, undeniable surge of ultimate control coursing through every single vein in my body. "Harrison," I said, delivering the final command with lethal, absolute precision. "Annihilate him completely." Monday morning arrived with the crisp, unforgiving clarity of a newly sharpened blade. High above the bustling streets of downtown Chicago, inside the gleaming glass and steel skyscraper that housed the global headquarters of Apex Holdings, the grand boardroom was flooded with cold, natural light. David sat at the center of the massive mahogany conference table. He was dressed in his absolute best custom-tailored suit, exuding the smug, impenetrable confidence of a man who believed he was about to conquer the corporate world. He checked his heavy gold watch, tapping his fingers eagerly against the polished wood. Next to him sat his chief financial officer, a highly anxious man frantically organizing the fraudulent balance sheets they had meticulously prepared for this final acquisition meeting. David leaned back in his plush leather chair, entirely unbothered by my sudden disappearance from his house over the weekend. In his arrogant mind, the trash had simply taken itself out, leaving him perfectly positioned to embrace his new billionaire lifestyle without any dead weight dragging him down. He checked his watch one more time, a confident smirk playing on his lips as he anticipated the arrival of the elusive Apex Holdings founder. Exactly. At 9 o'clock, the heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open with a resounding thud. David stood up immediately, buttoning his suit jacket and pasting on his most charismatic winning smile, fully prepared to shake the hand of his financial savior. But the smile completely froze on his face. I walked through the double doors, moving with the synchronized, predatory grace of a woman who owned the building, the table, and the very air he was breathing. I was no longer wearing a faded, oversized sweater or a plain black catering apron. I was dressed in a razor-sharp, tailored black Saint Laurent suit that cost more than his entire quarterly marketing budget. My hair was pulled back into a sleek, severe style, and my designer heels clicked against the marble floor with absolute terrifying authority. The faint red mark on my left cheek was expertly concealed by makeup, but the lethal chill in my eyes was completely bare. Flanking me on my right was Harrison, wearing a dark, formidable suit and carrying a thick leather briefcase. Trailing closely behind us was a team of 4 elite corporate litigators moving in perfect silent unison. We marched directly to the head of the long table. The air in the room instantly plummeted to freezing. David stood completely paralyzed. His right hand remained awkwardly suspended in midair, waiting for a handshake that was never going to happen. His eyes darted wildly from Harrison to the team of terrifying lawyers and finally landed directly on me. He blinked rapidly, his brain violently rejecting the visual information it was receiving. He looked at my power suit, my posture, and the undeniable deference the entire legal team showed me. The confident tech executive was suddenly reduced to a stammering, deeply confused man. "What the hell are you doing here, Nora?" David finally choked out, his voice cracking as he desperately tried to reclaim his stolen authority. He let out a harsh, nervous laugh, glancing at his chief financial officer as if seeking validation. "Did you follow me to my corporate meeting to beg for my forgiveness? Or did you just come here to make a scene? Security needs to escort my estranged wife out of the building immediately. She is clearly having a mental breakdown." None of the elite corporate litigators moved a single muscle. Harrison stepped forward, placing his heavy leather briefcase onto the polished mahogany table with a resounding thud. He looked at David with absolute unshielded contempt. "Security will not be escorting anyone out of this building," Harrison stated, his voice echoing through the massive boardroom. "I strongly suggest you sit down and watch your tone. You are currently speaking to the founder, sole owner, and chief executive officer of Apex Holdings, Ms. Nora." David physically stumbled backward. His knees hit the edge of his plush leather chair, and he collapsed heavily into the seat. His jaw dropped open, gasping for air that suddenly felt entirely unavailable. He looked at my tailored designer suit, my flawless posture, and the undeniable reality of my absolute power. The illusion of his entire life shattered into millions of jagged pieces right in front of his eyes. The quiet, submissive copywriter he had abused, belittled, and slapped was the apex predator he had been desperately trying to impress. I stepped up to the edge of the conference table. I did not raise my voice. I did not gloat. I operated with the surgical precision of a seasoned corporate executioner. "I am not here to buy your failing tech company, David," I said smoothly, opening a sleek black folder I held in my hand. I pulled out a thick stack of documents stamped with official federal seals and slid them directly across the smooth mahogany surface toward his trembling hands. "I am here to completely liquidate it." David stared blindly at the documents, his face draining of all remaining color. "What is this?" he whispered, his chest heaving with sheer panic. "That is a comprehensive federal dossier detailing your extensive corporate fraud," I explained calmly. "It contains every single manipulated balance sheet, every fabricated client account, and every instance of wire fraud you committed to hide your massive operational debts from investors. My internal acquisitions team compiled this undeniable evidence over the last 8 months. A complete duplicate of this file was submitted directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation exactly 1 hour ago." His chief financial officer gasped loudly, immediately pushing his chair back from the table and distancing himself from the impending blast radius. David looked exactly like a man who had just been strapped into the electric chair. "Your toxic bridge loan is formally in default." I continued, leaning forward slightly to ensure he heard every single lethal syllable. "Meridian Software Solutions, a company my firm officially acquired yesterday morning, has permanently revoked your vital licensing access. Your servers are entirely dead. Your fake empire is completely bankrupt. The acquisition deal you banked your entire existence on is officially canceled, and the aggressive liquidation of your assets begins right now." The suffocating silence that followed my declaration was absolute and heavy. David stared blankly at the stack of federal documents resting on the polished mahogany table. His breathing turned shallow and erratic. The grand corporate boardroom, a space specifically designed to witness his ultimate financial triumph, had instantly transformed into his execution chamber. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to beg for mercy, or to negotiate some pathetic compromise, but his vocal cords completely failed him. Before he could force a single syllable out of his throat, the sharp, frantic ringing of his cell phone shattered the quiet tension in the room. David flinched violently. He stared down at the phone resting near his trembling hand. The caller identification boldly displayed his daughter's name. His fingers shook as he reached out, swiping the screen to accept the call and pressing the device against his ear. Because the boardroom was so incredibly still, the shrill, terrified voice of Madison echoed clearly through the speaker for everyone to hear. "Dad, where are you?" Madison screamed, her voice completely hysterical and stripped of all its usual entitlement. "There are police cars parked in the driveway. The county sheriff is here with a massive moving crew. They are literally throwing all of my things onto the front lawn. They took my expensive influencer ring lights and smashed them directly into a garbage dumpster. Dad, they told me we are trespassing. The sheriff said the house belongs to Vanguard Properties, and we are being legally evicted right now. You need to come home and stop them." David's eyes widened in sheer unadulterated terror. He slowly lowered the phone from his ear, placing it on speaker mode as Madison continued to wail loudly about her designer clothes being dragged out into the dirt. He looked across the wide conference table at me, his face completely devoid of its usual arrogant color. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. "Vanguard Properties." David whispered, the brutal realization finally hitting him with the devastating force of a freight train. You evicted us." Harrison stepped forward, adjusting his immaculate suit jacket with professional precision. "Your toxic bridge loan defaulted the exact second Meridian Software locked your company servers this morning, David. As the primary debt holder, Apex Holdings exercised its immediate legal right to secure all collateral. Since you fraudulently attempted to leverage a property legally owned by Vanguard Properties, a direct subsidiary of Apex, the eviction process was severely expedited due to your criminal interference. You do not own a home. You do not own a tech company. You do not even own the expensive suit you are currently wearing." The phone slipped entirely from David's sweaty fingers and clattered onto the mahogany table. Madison's frantic crying continued to broadcast through the small speaker, providing a harsh, poetic soundtrack to his total destruction. David looked desperately at his chief financial officer. The anxious man immediately stood up, grabbed his leather briefcase, and rushed out of the boardroom without saying a single word, desperate to legally distance himself from the incoming federal indictment. Left entirely alone, the reality of his profound failure finally crushed David's fragile ego. The man who had confidently slapped me across the face, who had called me a worthless dependent, and who had arrogantly demanded I serve his entitled daughter physically crumbled into pieces. His legs simply gave out. David fell heavily to his knees right there on the expensive boardroom carpet. He grabbed the thick edge of the mahogany table, heavy tears streaming down his face, completely ruining his executive persona. "Nora, please," David sobbed, his voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate whine. "I am so sorry. I was incredibly stressed. I was out of my mind with the company failing. I never meant to hurt you. I love you. Please do not do this to me. Do not do this to Madison. We will be completely homeless. We have absolutely nothing left. I will do whatever you want. I will sign anything you put in front of me. Just please give me another chance to make things right." I looked down at the man kneeling on the floor. I felt absolutely no pity. I felt no remorse. I felt only the clean, sharp edge of ultimate justice. I picked up my leather portfolio and stepped away from the head of the table. I walked deliberately toward the heavy boardroom doors. As I passed David, he reached out, trying to grab the hem of my tailored suit pants in a final act of utter desperation. I stepped effortlessly over his grasping hand. I paused, looking down at his tear-stained face. "From today on, David," I said, my voice ringing with absolute icy finality, "you should really learn how to stop being a freeloader." I turned my back on him and walked out the doors, flanked perfectly by Harrison and my elite legal team. The sound of David weeping loudly on the floor faded away as the elevator doors slid shut, sealing his fate completely. The aftermath of his massive downfall was incredibly swift. David was arrested 2 days later on multiple federal counts of corporate fraud and bank deception. The authorities seized whatever remaining assets he had tried to hide. He was sentenced to 8 years in a federal penitentiary. Patricia, his fiercely arrogant mother, was forced to drain her entire savings account just to cover his mounting legal defense fees. With no money and no luxury estate, Patricia and Madison had to move into a tiny rundown apartment on the far outskirts of the city. Madison's platinum credit cards were obviously declined everywhere. Without her father's fake wealth to support her influencer lifestyle, she was forced to get a minimum wage job working the night shift at a local fast food restaurant just to help pay their basic utility bills. The high society friends who used to attend their lavish barbecues entirely forgot they existed. But out of the ashes of that toxic family, true loyalty was properly rewarded. Jamal and Rachel were entirely spared from the financial blast radius. Because Jamal had shown me genuine respect and had risked his own standing to protect me, I anonymously funded a massive legal trust that allowed him to open his own independent corporate law firm. He is now one of the most highly successful attorneys in Chicago, and Rachel recently welcomed their first child into a home filled with actual love, not fraudulent prestige. I walked away from a living nightmare and returned to my empire stronger and entirely unburdened. I learned that blood and marriage certificates do not automatically make a family. True family is built on mutual respect, unwavering integrity, and showing up for someone when they have absolutely nothing to offer you in return. Setting brutal boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. You do not ever have to tolerate disrespect from people who rely on your silence to maintain their fake power. Sometimes the absolute best revenge is not screaming or fighting. It is simply walking away, letting them drown in their own arrogance, and quietly buying the bank that holds their mortgage. Have you ever held a massive secret to protect yourself from toxic people who thought they controlled your life? How did you finally expose the truth and reclaim your power? Share your journey in the comments below. If my story resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about surviving betrayal and taking back your life. Remember, your silence is not weakness. It is just the quiet before you unleash the storm. The compelling narrative of Nora's silent warfare serves as a powerful testament to one profound lesson. True strength does not require an audience, and the most devastating response to disrespect is often absolute silence combined with meticulous preparation. In a society that frequently equates power with volume aggression and loud dominance, Nora's journey brilliantly flips the script. When faced with unimaginable cruelty from her husband David and his entitled family, her immediate instinct was not to scream, argue, or beg for the respect she inherently deserved. Instead, she recognized that engaging emotionally with toxic individuals only feeds their fragile egos and validates their false sense of superiority. The lesson here is deeply transformative. We often drain our own emotional reserves trying to prove our worth to people who are stubbornly committed to misunderstanding us. David and his family built their entire identities on the illusion of wealth and the continuous belittlement of others. Nora understood that fighting them on their own terms would only pull her deeper into their toxicity. By choosing complete silence, she protected her peace and maintained her absolute clarity. She funneled her energy into securing her boundaries and executing a flawless exit strategy that relied entirely on facts, legal boundaries, and undeniable truth. Her ultimate victory was not found in the total ruin of her husband's fake empire, but in her unwavering commitment to her own self-worth. She walked away from a gilded cage because she knew she held the keys to her own freedom all along. This story firmly reminds us that we never have to tolerate abuse to keep the peace, and that walking away is not a surrender, it is the absolute reclamation of personal power. Take a moment today to firmly evaluate the boundaries in your own life and share in the comments below how you plan to reclaim your power from those who consistently underestimate you.